Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the C Squared podcast. A lot of things have happened since the last time we sat together. Fabi, you played the tournament. A lot of exciting things have happened in the chess world as well. We've had the Clash of Claims, we've had the French League, Summer Chess Classic, a bunch of other tournaments as well. But of course, let's start with the big event that just finished, Norway Chess. We chatted about it. You were just en route to the tournament the last time we discussed. Let's catch up. So, how was it?
Yeah, it was quite a big tournament, one of the strongest in the history of chess by average rating. Although I don't know if we should go by average rating because that we know ratings change all the time, and there were also times when we didn't really have FIDE ratings. So historically, it's hard to say how strong it is, but it's a super strong tournament. It had
Very strong.
Magnus, it had Ding as the world champion, it had Hikaru and myself as the world's number two and three after Magnus, and those places switched around. So I started number two, I ended number three, and vice versa. And then it had Pragnanta, who is uh, definitely one of the strongest of the young players in the world. I mean, arguably like very close in strength to Arjun, to Noterbek, to Gukesh,
Yep.
who won the candidates, and those would be like, let's say, the top picks of the young guys who are aged like 18 to 20 or so. And yeah, it was not a good event for me. It started all right,
It
but I
started off
lost to
well,
a kind of
right?
yeah, it started well. I mean, I started with two draws and then I beat Ding with white, and it's hard to say what kind of start that is. It's kind of good, but not like you're running away with the tournament. It's just the beginning, and yeah. So all the classical games were followed up with an Armageddon game, and which is fun. But it really turns out that the Armageddon is not very important for the final scoring. I mean, the classical wins or losses are what really make the difference in the tournament. I mean, the Armageddon does make a difference. It's an extra half point if you win, or minus half a point if you lose. You know, you if you lose Armageddon, you get 1 point. If you win the Armageddon, you get one and a half. But if you win or lose a classical game, that's like completely tournament
Huge.
changing.
Huge, yeah.
And yeah, for me, it just like went wrong in two consecutive rounds.
I think
And
it
after
was
that, I
it was round it was the first couple of rounds where you lost in the Armageddon, but we were chatting about it and you kind of understood that, okay, sure, losing in the Armageddon sucks from a psychological perspective, but it doesn't really change much in the grand scheme of things. And in fact, after you beat Ding, I think you jumped from second to last or something like that to first in the standings in one round.
yeah, I'm not sure if it was first or like or second place, but very close to first. Yeah, one classical win really helped me to the top of the standings, but unfortunately, I lost the next round. And I wouldn't say I lost in an unnecessary way. I didn't play a poor game. I made one, two, maybe three poor decisions, but very like not obvious at the time that they were poor decisions, but it turned out
That was
to
the game
be.
against
And
Magnus, the first.
yeah, and then I got an endgame, which is like queen three against queen two. And if the pawns are together, if his pawns are not separated, like
Mm-hmm.
if he has one pawn island, then it's a pretty easy draw. But he has the pawns were separated, and he has a path pawn, which makes it much more difficult. And it turned out that the endgame is difficult to the point that uh, I wasn't really making mistakes until my final move.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I already thought I was losing before I made that final move
Yeah.
because his pawn uh, is already on the second rank. That is to say, my second rank. So it's basically about to promote, and I can keep it there by giving checks forever,
Yeah.
or forcing his king to block the pawn. And one kind of crucial variation is one where I allow him to promote, but then I have a perpetual check with one queen against two queens.
Which is
And
kind of insane to
and
find with like 30 seconds on the clock, right?
yeah, like the argument could be made on the one hand, like Magnus thought basically you always lose this in practice. I thought he also thought it was just objectively losing. When he found out that it was objectively draw, he said, okay, you basically lose this in practice all the time. I thought it was losing. When I found out it was a draw, I kind of internally debated how realistic it is to hold this with, let's say, the 10-second increment,
Hmm.
or like I don't know, I was down to maybe 30 seconds, 40 seconds, whatever it is. At some point, you'll get down to a 10-second increment because you're not going to keep that time buffer forever.
Yeah.
And then how realistic is it? On the one hand, you can maybe like go by elimination with some moves, like these moves obviously lose, and therefore I have to play this move. On the other hand, you can't rule out that at some point after defending for, I don't know, 30 moves of this position, at some point you just panic. For me, it happened early on that I panicked. I thought it was losing, and I just made a move which was kind of random, and um, it was more of like one of those desperation moves. Like I don't know what to do. All moves seemed losing. I played one of them.
But I feel like at this
Um,
point, if you haven't analyzed this very specific endgame, let's say a month before, 10 out of 10 players will think that this position is just losing. Give them in a
yeah,
classical
possibly.
game as well. Give them 2 hours to think. They're still gonna think it's just losing. Instinctively, it just looks completely losing. Yeah, king on h1,
Yeah,
the
it
pawn.
does because my king is in the checks. It looks like my king is vulnerable to checks,
Yeah,
and his king is kind of covered. But it turns out that yeah, this is a draw. I can keep him from promoting, or once he promotes, he actually ends up in perpetual check. So, so then the question is if this is like practically very hard to hold or impossible to hold or whatever.
I
Impossible,
think
we can't say.
I think
That's
it's
subjective.
close to impossible. I mean, I would say a lot of the king and pawn, queen end games. So sorry, queen end games with the pawn up, um, and no other pawns on the board. Then those, sure, some of them are technically a draw, and then they're holdable in practical chess. But this one in particular, I think is just like close to impossible. Like maybe earlier. I don't know if you can not allow him to push his pawn. Is there a way to not allow him to push his pawn?
There's like nothing really better that you can do from the beginning. The pawn is somehow just going forward.
Hmm.
So yeah, then the question is like, what did I do wrong in the game? Of course, in the opening, definitely could identify that I should have played a5. I was sort of thinking, should I play a5, should I not? And I wasn't sure.
A5 at
But
what point?
logically, I should have just done. What's that?
A5 at what point?
Like after he played knight d8, basically before he played b5.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not like this move gives me an advantage, but it means that I'm on the slightly better side of it rather than soon I became on the slightly worse side of it. So that move would probably ensure that I don't end up on the defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Mm-hmm.
that I'm like I shouldn't lose a position, of course, if I don't play a5. It's just that I end up on the slightly defensive side of it.
Yeah.
So it's better to avoid that scenario. And then the other thing is, you can maybe criticize my knight takes g5 move,
Mm-hmm.
but it's real. I think this is actually a very difficult moment, although it objectively is a mistake, which leads to this kind of unpleasant endgame. And if I made another move, then I probably hold it without like huge suffering. It's really hard to criticize this, I think, because it's just one of those like natural moves, and it's not clear that it's bad. And to like figure out it's bad, you would need to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
Not that it's objectively bad, but that it like is inaccurate and leads to a unpleasant position. Just this, you would have to like take a lot of time, and then, or maybe you have some instinct, like maybe your instincts lead you away from this move. Those are the two possibilities.
Do you like this
So
combination, this hybrid format with classical Armageddon, but also with this time control where you don't get anything until move 40 and then you get like 10 seconds?
it's unforgiving, but I don't mind it. I don't think that my result was dictated by the time control. I think I wasn't in good shape, and probably whatever the time control, I wouldn't have done very well. But yeah, it did end up being that two unpleasant endgames I had. Well, actually, one of them really wasn't due to time. One of them was definitely uh, exacerbated by time, the game against Magnus, but the game against Prague,
Oh,
that I
yeah.
got that I got an unpleasant endgame, and then I lost it. I actually had plenty of time on the clock.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
I had plenty of time. He didn't have time, and I still just made some bad decisions at some certain moments in the end game. But I could already feel like something was wrong during that game because I really blundered something just to get into an unpleasant position. I blundered something very basic earlier in the game. So I felt like something was wrong at that point in the tournament. And then after that, I tried to like create some chances, but mostly what I was doing was playing inaccurately. And
Hmm.
rather than creating chances, I was taking fine positions and then turning them into bad positions. Like against Ding, I think really had a good chance to win this game if I don't play knight to c5. If I don't make that move, which turns the better position into an equal one, I think that if I had found a way to get an advantage, I would have just won the game because it was really unpleasant for him to hold it, and he was not in a good
Remind me
psychological
again
state to.
the moment. Knight to c5, you said?
So I played bc4, bc4, and now knight to c5. So instead of knight c5, I have e5, d takes c6, and knight to e5. This is really strong. And yeah, if I had done that, I think I probably would have won the game. It's not, of course, a guarantee, it's just speculation, but I don't think that he would have been up to the task of defending a really unpleasant position like that.
Hmm. Hmm. Cool,
So
cool,
yeah,
cool.
and then after that, I no longer like I kind of mentally checked out of the tournament. It was my last chance to like fight for. I still tried against Prague a bit. Last round, I didn't really care about the game because I wasn't fighting for anything, and I didn't even feel like I was fighting for a spoiler role because like I wasn't going to try to beat Magnus with black
It's
in.
very difficult to beat Magnus with black if he doesn't want to push, yeah?
Yeah, yeah, he was going to take it safe. I knew that. I wasn't like, why would I risk and potentially ruin my tournament further rather than just call it a day and everyone's happy, I guess. Like
Yeah.
if I had a chance in first place, I would have tried. But
I mean, at this point, it
okay,
was on Hikaru to try to win, right? If he wanted to catch up with Magnus. I mean,
yeah,
Magnus had
the fight for
absolutely no
first place
reason
was
to fight.
between them.
Yeah.
For a few rounds, it was clear it was between them. But I had a very strong feeling that it was Magnus running away with it at some point, and everyone really tightened up at some point.
Hmm.
And this was definitely favorable for Magnus keeping his lead because like Ding played quite reasonably against Hikaru.
He played a really good
Uh,
game. Okay, one of the few, but
okay,
he did
I
play
think it
a
was, yeah,
really good game.
it was a normal game. I mean, it was a decent game, but after
Given
what
the
remained
trend,
too, that
let's say, given his trend
yeah,
throughout
of
the
course
event.
that's a huge improvement.